another episode of Extra Time, the U.S. Men's National Team Soccer Podcast, through the lens of fans. I got a new guest with me today. This is best man at my wedding. Well, my best friend's Chris Looker. Chris, how you doing?
Well, tonight, how you doing, Tim?
I am doing pretty well. I'm glad to be back. Getting my schedule aligned and coming up with times to do this has been difficult, but I got to just be a little bit more dedicated and make this kind of stuff happen. So, Chris, why don't you give us a little bit of a background on yourself, soccer, what, you're as a fan of U.S. soccer, right? Like, where you put yourself, how long you've been a fan, all that good stuff.
I've been playing soccer since I could walk. My grandfather immigrated from Germany, and he, instilled soccer in the family. So we've all been playing as long as I can remember. Um, as far as the U.S. men's national team and watching, um, the first, I vaguely remember some of like the '98. I was 10, the '98 World Cup. Um, I vaguely remember that. What's funny actually is growing up, I had a '94 World Cup hat that I absolutely loved. The U.S. World Cup.
Yeah.
And obviously, I had no idea about what it was at the time, but I loved that hat. Um, and so, with the first, World Cup and the first real taste of the U.S. men's national team was definitely the 2002 World Cup. Um, we we had a big auditorium at the high school. Um, I was in middle school at the time. I was in eighth grade. There was a big auditorium up there, and our high school soccer coach had us all come up and watch those games in the auditorium before school, because the games were at like 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. So we would come up early, and the whole, all the high school, middle school soccer team, the ones who wanted to show up, we all sat in those, in that big auditorium and watched the games on the big screen. It was amazing. I mean, it was so much fun. It was such a cool experience, as a 13, 14-year-old, to watch that, with all the other guys, and just the excitement, especially that World Cup, making it to the quarterfinals. I can remember watching that game against Portugal. It was awesome. Since then, I've been a pretty dedicated fan. Um, definitely watching all the World Cups, watching as much, in the early 2000s, we really weren't able to watch a lot of, there wasn't coverage for so many of those games outside of the World Cup. I watched what World Cup qualifiers I could, when we were in the Nations League or the Nations Cup, watched that. The Gold Cups, once they started airing those, I watched any of those that I could. I've been loving the team for, it's over 20 years now, which is a little crazy to think about. But,
Right.
yeah.
And it also makes a big difference, once you start to become, and you get older and you become an adult, and you're the one in charge of, your cable subscriptions and your streaming services. And
It's true. It has been a lot easier to watch over the last,
right.
8 years than it was previous to that.
Right. And it was also like, you think about, and we're going to get into this in a second, like soccer culture, and just like any other
Mhm.
culture, right? Like you said, getting it from your grandfather, and then your parents and having it passed on. And so, just like you, I had soccer super young. My dad and my uncle both played. My uncle playing semi-professionally for the New York Cosmos before the MLS gets formed. My dad was at the '94 World Cup with my uncle. We're same as you, kicking the ball around, right as we can walk. And we still didn't know about the games, right? Like, so if my dad didn't plan on watching the soccer game, I didn't know the U.S. men were playing, right? And like growing up with it, you almost kind of like took it for granted, right? Like you'd be flipping through the TV and you would just kind of expect it to be on, right? Because if the NFL's got games on and the NBA's got games on and Major League Baseball's got games on, then you're trusting ESPN that when the soccer game comes, they're going to play it. And you
It would
get
be somewhere.
right, you get older than you should be before you realize that's not how this works. And you're going to have to go find the games yourself. I've spent many a time finding peer-to-peer sharing private streams that were or were not legal, just because I was like the only game. I mean, like we had probably 6 years where the only time that United States was on, it might have been 6, it was at least 4, was just all on Telemundo, and like Univision, and like there was nothing
That is true.
was in English. You like, couldn't even find it. It was just like, yeah, the U.S. is playing on ESPN Deportes, and you're like, what? Like, and you can't even, and like you're like looking it up and you can't even find it, but. Yeah, no, I remember. Yeah, those. I mean, I unfortunately wasn't any of those lecture hall ones. I was a little bit younger than you, but I remember when I got to college watching them, and as my dad would take over projector screens in lecture halls and just watch on massive screens.
That was the way to do it. That was
Yeah,
awesome.
it was the way to do it. So, growing up, who's either your favorite U.S. player overall, and then your favorite U.S. player currently?
Um, well, I mean, as you can probably tell behind me, my favorite U.S. player overall, uh, even though I did start watching when I was younger, and I have a lot of favorites from those early teams, um, those are more of just emotional of like watching the game. When I got into playing and in high school, I understood the game more, and so watching that, Stuart Holden is definitely my favorite player, U.S. player ever, just for how he played the game. The position that he played and the way, the full box to box. He was a fantastic ball winner. He was so disruptive in the midfield. Um, his one big season at Bolton, he led the league in tackles by a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And he was so I loved that his willingness to get in and get the ball. But then he also had fantastic control. He wasn't necessarily a nifty feet player, but he had great first touch. He had excellent vision. He saw the field really well, and his passing and distribution was very good. So he's definitely my favorite overall. I've got others I could say. I loved Claudio Reyna. He was my favorite when I was young. Of the more modern ones, I don't know. Of the current players, though, it's a little bit of a toss-up. I think I lean towards Weston McKennie, um, because he is pretty similar to Holden actually in the way he plays. Um, and he is engaged, and when he is really committed to the game, I mean, man, he plays like a train. He is flying up and down the field. He shoves people off the ball. He wins the ball hard, and the way he attacks the box, for kind of like that second level runs into the box behind the strikers, is awesome. And he scores lots of goals that way. He scores so many goals like that for Schalke when he played there. And so, yeah, I would say McKennie, although Reyna is up there, just because of his skill level.
Mm-hmm. Boy, we are.
His touch is awesome.
I was gonna say we're fairly similar in that. I know, I would have to agree that Holden probably is my favorite player that I've seen so far for the U.S. men. But and I do like Weston McKennie. And this is not just like to sit here and copy you. If you go back and watch other videos, when the United States was picking Player of the Year, I was the favorite to say I don't think Pasilic deserved it. Not that Pasilic was a poor player by any means. He played fantastic for us, but just spent he spent a number of time hurt. And going back to Holden, and starting to tie this into soccer culture, for you and I, that really seemed to be the first time that we really focused on American players overseas. And I'm not saying that's the first time the United States had it, right? We knew of the Brian McBride. We knew of Clint Dempsey. We knew of those guys. But it was the first time you and I were like, okay, let's like follow this team and see what we look like. And it sort of led us to find other players and other openings and
Yeah,
start you and I through the lens of where are these guys on the national team? Right? We sort of grew up with
yeah,
this
absolutely.
this whole field of, MLS soccer and everyone in the United States going, I mean, that's great, but the MLS just started and we're not going to beat
Yeah.
England and Brazil and Argentina with these guys, despite whatever ad U.S. soccer wanted to run. Um, and so when we think about soccer culture in the United States, um, what to you is so different about the way the world sees soccer and the way the United States sees soccer? What to you is like the biggest difference?
Um, the biggest difference really, and this comes a little bit from my newer perspective. My daughter is 6 and has just started rec soccer, and I've been coaching her rec soccer team last year and this year. So the biggest difference that I see is really just the expectation for what soccer is. You know, overseas, basically every other nation that is out there, um, soccer to them is the passion, and it is the goal, and it is it's what we want to dedicate ourselves to and what we want to follow. Um, in America, obviously we have lots of other sports. We have football and basketball and baseball, and hockey even, that are have historically been more prevalent. So what I see soccer as, because we have tons of kids in this rec soccer program. At the 4 to 6 year old level, but then the participation gets less and less and less as the ages go up. So soccer in the U.S. is like, it's just the fun game. It's not serious. It's just their introduction to learning how to run around, learning how to be a part of a team. Um, Once they've had some experience of playing on a team sport, well, then we can dedicate ourselves to a more
Mm-hmm.
important sport,
Right, exactly. And I like that you bring up rec
or
soccer.
a more something that they see as worth following.
Right, yeah. I completely agree. And I love that you're bringing up rec soccer because a bunch of my coworkers were chatting about it and they're chatting about their little girls, 8 through 10 playing rec soccer. And
Yeah.
it's not just what you said about, well, we'll do this to introduce you to sports and it's not physical and it's not context. You won't get hurt and that'll be really good for you. And then when you get older, you can do a real sport, right? Like, because rec soccer is
Yeah.
like the weekend thing, right? There's a reason that soccer mom is a term because your kids just go, they play soccer on the weekends, you go get brunch with your family. And then when your kids get older and they get to high school, they're probably doing something different. But the other thing that really hurts our culture is that we truly are just painfully ignorant about what the game itself entails, right? And to listen to these women talk about how much they love their kids' coaches and, oh, did your kid learn squash the bug? And I'm like, what, squash the bug? Like, what are you talking about? And the woman's like, yeah, like the ball comes and you put your foot right on the top of it. And I'm like, no. Like, why are we teaching kids to trap the ball with the bottom of their foot?
No, yeah.
Like, and we're like loving it, and you're sitting here and you're like, this stuff doesn't fly, right, in other countries. Now I understand
No.
not, nobody's perfect, and I'm sure you could, I could have somebody comment from like Sweden and be like, no, my rec league sucks too, right? Like, but what it builds into, like you said, with a lot of kids playing and they get older and older and older, is the same problem that you and I had, right? So you look at the section that you and I grew up in, right? Were we going to make the men's national team? No. Were we going to go D1? No. But we could play D3, right? Maybe not great D3, but we were D3 caliber players. But the problem we run into is nobody's looking at high school sports, right? They're just
No.
not watching it because they're doing it. So as we get older, unless your parents can shell out thousands of dollars for you to play this game, you're not going
I
to
mean, it
get
was
noticed.
the premier teams, it was $1,500 for one season, like the fall season.
Right.
It's $1,500 just
And
to
there's
be a
no team it was within an hour of us.
part of the team, and that was an hour away. So you
Yep.
had to spend, yeah, exactly.
Right. And you're either going into, we were either playing down in Binghamton, you're playing up in Albany at Blackwatch, you're playing up in Utica.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there was, and like you said, right, like $1,500 plus the drive. And the practices were during the week. So
Yeah.
even if you had the drive, right, even if you as a 15-year-old have the drive, you actually have no car. You can't drive yourself there, right? So your parents have to make that sacrifice, which right? Whereas so many other countries have this system to just go, like, let's just create and play, right? And I look at the United States soccer like setup, right? So club sports. Well, we associate clubs with big cities, right? Like let's go to football. The New York Giants, right? Playing down in the city.
Mm-hmm.
The Chicago Bears, the Dallas Cowboys, right? The Miami Dolphins. These huge cities have teams, and that's it. That's it, right? We want to make an expansion, right? It's going to be in some massive city, and it's going to be multi-billions of dollars. Whereas you go overseas to England in the Premier League, and every single town
I mean, well, yeah, there's
has
a
a
team
team.
on every corner.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody does. And what's crazy is like and here's like a shameless plug. If you have Amazon Prime and you want to watch some really good series, there's a series called All or Nothing, and they go behind the
Mm-hmm.
scenes on big club teams. The Arsenal one is fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. And what it does is it gives you this like lens to look at it through. And what I learned through it is just how many of these teams, like you said, really did open up across the street from each other, right? Or like a mile away. Like the North London derbies, we're talking like
Mm-hmm.
within 5 miles, you have Arsenal and Tottenham, right? And there, I mean, there's more teams than that in just London, but if you win, you move up a division, you move up a division, you move up a division. We'll get more into that in a second. But if everybody has a team, then everybody can play, and everybody's okay knowing they might not make the Premier League, right? Like you and I played rec soccer and we played pickup soccer in our 20s. We go out to Brockport, we just joined some co-ed league. But in England, we wouldn't have had to
Absolutely.
do that. We could have jumped on like our local bar team, and if we were good enough, we'd be playing in that league. And
Yeah,
maybe
absolutely.
maybe we don't go anywhere else other than that, but you think about the skill levels, right? You
Mm.
get, accessibility, all those other things. So that certainly I feel like affects the culture of it. And
Well, honestly, that's a little bit of the problem that we're seeing in a lot of other sports in America now too. Um, with the whole name, image, and likeness stuff going on in college football and college basketball, um, as you said, the the lower levels are professional in all these other countries. Are professional, even if they don't get paid much. Like, I mean, you were talking about programs to watch. I've been watching Welcome to Wrexham. The Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney team, which
yeah.
that show is fantastic.
Oh, I believe it. I
And
mean, they're getting so much
it's
hype
really
too.
cool.
They're getting so much hype.
Yeah. Um, and that's another cool kind of behind the scenes what an British club looks like. Um, that the lower levels where they learn and they train is professional, even if it's only a lot of them are only making 30 to 40,000 pounds a year, which is a pretty normal pay for any other entry level job. You
Hmm.
know, maybe that's all they're making, but they're still getting paid for doing it.
Uh-uh.
Um,
Right.
in America, the only sport that has that is baseball. Football and basketball, they have to go to college. Um, they're getting a little bit better with basketball with the G League, um, and having a team for kids out of high school to go into that. But that really is one of the big problems of it is the idea of amateur sports in America, the
Hmm.
NCAA, and how like they have kind of created a monopoly on pre-professional or semi-professional level athletes. Um, there's just there's until there is a competition to the amateur sports, there's not really going to be a way um, that type of development system to happen. Because like you said, if it's colleges, well, they're only looking at these premier teams. They don't have the time or the resources to go, to some little high school out in 20 miles from the nearest metropolitan center. They just don't have the resources for it. Whereas if you had local teams, they could look in their local area much more easily.
Mm-hmm. And I completely agree. And this is going to be a weird comment because I used to think, right, and I'm about to start to make this argument again, that typically you just follow the money, right? So like the money has to be the problem. And like you said with the amateur sports, right? We have all these guys that are playing in college that really are good enough to be paid. And a lot of them are going to
Oh
go
yeah,
on and play
absolutely.
professionally, right? A lot of them are going to go on and play professionally. Overseas
Hmm.
in England, you're not associated with university. You're not associated with anything. And so
Oh, exactly.
you're going to college and getting paid to play soccer at the same time. Whereas in America, you're getting paid to play football through scholarships and stuff. You're not actually getting paid because the university just keeps the money anyway. Um, and then you're expected to play your sport on the side. And what it does is it keeps all of the money at the top, right? The universities keep it, the media deals keep it, the pro teams keep it, and nobody else can have it. And it's really hindering our ability to generate high caliber players. And
Absolutely.
like you said, right now it's the most apparent in men's soccer, right? But the women lost to England and Spain, so we know it's
Mhm.
coming there, right? And
Yeah, that's
traditionally,
something.
our women are just
Something.
disgusting. So
Yeah, that's something. People have said. Well, the women's national team is so dominant, and they're just going to be dominant. It's like, well, no, they're not going to continue to be dominant because know, America, as much as people complain about a lot of the issues that are in America and that are real, America was pretty much the pioneer of women's sports.
right,
Title IX and all that stuff was way before any other nations. And so women started playing soccer in America at higher levels way before these other countries. And so them dominating on the international stage is not really a surprise because they have had the most opportunities. Um, that is changing drastically. We've seen that for the last 10 years or so. There's been a lot more international growth on the women's level,
right.
and there's much harder, stiffer challenges for the women's team now.
Right.
Um,
And our women's soccer league used to be it, right? I mean, you like Marta from Brazil was coming and playing, like all the big names were playing in the USL. But the women's Premier League in England is not a joke anymore. Like these are
oh,
really
it's
good teams,
fantastic.
right? They're
Yeah.
really good. They're good games. I've watched, highlights from a couple of them. These are high
Mhm.
caliber games, right? And
The women's Super League, when they play Barcelona and Man City and Man United, and when those teams play each other, like
right.
those are great players and some really good competitive games.
Right. And it used to be, 10 years ago, you and I would be like patronizing when we're saying stuff like this, right? Now it's like, no, this is the real deal. Like
Yeah.
this is not like, oh, well, this is just the best that the women are doing, so let's like, throw them a bone. This is like, nope, this is good soccer. This is quality soccer and it's changing the game, right? They're
Yeah.
working
Hmm.
so hard at changing the lens that we see women's sports through. And to not to to keep getting too far off topic, you bring that back to the other sports in the United States. We had a scare with the men's basketball team at the Olympics, right? Because like, what in the
Yeah.
world? You know what I mean? Like, and
Absolutely. Hmm.
like it's coming because other countries are investing tons of things, right? Let's go to CONCACAF, right? Mexico is traditionally the team that smashes everybody, and the United States is the runner up, and it's really like as far as I knew growing up,
Everybody else after that.
right?
Yeah.
You knew Mexico was going to make it, and it was up to the United States not to screw this up, right? And
Hmm.
as long as even if we stumbled and bumbled our way and like scratched and clawed and scrawled, like we would still be second, right? And we would still come out in our group. And like Canada, like Canada didn't even make the final hex, like ever.
That several times, yeah,
Right. I mean, like
absolutely.
literally, I'm like on Wikipedia, like when's the last time Canada made like right? And here they are. They poured a ton of money into it. They have a fantastic team. They have a fantastic coach. Their guys are playing overseas. They were very intentional about growing their youth program and developing
Yeah,
their players.
absolutely.
And look what happens. It pays off. And so when you think about from a culture stance, right? And we're gonna keep coming back. This is gonna be like the central theme as we look at the different groups. When we bring up the English roster, and you see how deep it is, right? You look at the players that are going to be left off England's roster.
Mhm.
I mean, go to the Premier League and just look at Premier. Like, go to Wolves, go to go to Newcastle, go to Manchester City, go to Chelsea. Look at how many England flags come up, and go. Some of these guys aren't. Not only are they not on England's team, they're never going to make England's team, and they're going to play on the
Because
highest Premier level for a top 6 team. There are guys that are going to play in the Champions League every year that aren't going to make their national teams. And,
no, yeah,
and
absolutely.
and we're over here, and again, we're over here like, oh, Pasilic is playing for Chelsea. He's not. He's not playing for Chelsea, right? Like I was excited as everybody else
Yeah,
was. You know what I mean? Like I was, and this has been my
he
tangent.
was.
He
He
was,
was
and I
playing
was
for them.
stoked, right? I was excited. I was just like every other fan. I jumped on it. I said, we did it. We finally have a high caliber athlete, right? And he started off great, and he was scoring goals and getting assists, and he was doing stuff, and then we won the Club World Cup, and he's winning the champion, and like he's in all this stuff. And then all of a sudden, reality hit, and it wasn't about having a Hollywood moment. It wasn't about your honeymoon phase. It was about how are you? And am I saying Christian Pulisic is terrible? No, but I'm saying look at Chelsea's roster: Aubameyang,
He's got a lot of
right? Kai
competition.
Havertz, Mason Mount. Do I think that if I was given the option, would I play Christian Pulisic over Kai Havertz? No. Would I play him over Mason Mount? No. Would I play him over Aubameyang? Maybe, but Aubameyang's a striker, so no.
A little
And
bit different, yeah.
right, and so you're like, right, like I have to be a real fan here and go, Christian Pulisic is never going to play for Chelsea, so he needs to leave. Now I understand Chelsea's like, sorry, I own you and you're not going anywhere, but I think it's time for like American soccer fans to kind of let this one go. But the reason I bring up Pasilic, because we're talking about soccer culture, is the rest of the world is not a fan of U.S. soccer players, right? Not all the time. And
A lot of the times, no.
right,
Yeah.
I mean, if you've been paying attention, and this is not just for you, Chris, but for anybody who's watching, Serginho Dest, AC Milan doesn't like him. Barcelona didn't
I
like
mean,
him,
yeah.
right?
Barcelona tried. Hmm.
Right, Barcelona, and you know what? I was excited. I was like, man, Serginho Dest playing for Barcelona. I didn't know this, right? But then when you started like looking into it and looking at the Twitter feed and stuff, it's like it's no different than I've been with my U.S. soccer guys, right? Like, I could not have been more vocal about not liking Michael Bradley, right? And I'll probably go to the grave. I'll be telling my grandchildren, at least you didn't have to put up with Michael Bradley in your center midfield, and his dad was a coach. Like that's gonna be me just because I'm so bitter about it. But like, you know, Twitter, these people like the fans, they're over it. And what's interesting is I don't necessarily think, I don't have reason to believe that they're over it because the players aren't good. I think it's that culture clash that like the US hasn't really proved itself yet. And so when given the option, if I could take a guy from England or Spain over a guy from the United States, I think I'm going to do it. And that's kind of how I see the rest of the world. They're not thrilled to have to take these guys from America because the MLS is where their players go after they can't make it. So
Retire, yeah.
so why would we want guys from the MLS coming over here? But I don't know. What are your thoughts? I just said a lot of stuff. What are your thoughts on that?
Um, well, I mean, going back to Christian Pulisic specifically, as far as his participation at Chelsea, I do think it was a little bit of a stylistic clash with Thomas Tuchel, which is ironic because he got his big break under Tuchel at Dortmund.
That's what doesn't make
Um,
any sense to me. You play all the time for Thomas Tuchel. You come over there. Thomas Tuchel loves you. And then 3 months in, Thomas Tuchel's like, yeah, I don't know. This Pasilic guy, stop talking to me about him like he's a joke.
Well, and I think it was indicative early when Tuchel first arrived there. Said it's a little bit of a disadvantage for Christian because when I had him at Dortmund, it was because he was still very young, so he was a lot of times coming in as a sub, in the 55, 60-minute range, and he'd make a big impact, and so he said like I know how good he can be off the bench, and so it's a little bit of a disadvantage for him because I can use him that way, and I know that I can. And so I do think there was a little bit of a mindset for Tuchel just from the get go of he's not a starter. If you look,
Right.
I mean, if you look at the season before that under Lampard, the team as a whole was not as good, but their attack was strong.
Mm-hmm.
Defense and their midfield was a shambles, and they let in so many goals that season under Lampard. Despite the fact that they actually still did well, but they did well because they scored goals, and their attack was decisive. They were not a Manchester City possess the ball, possess you to death team. Were a lot more like Tottenham is with when they have their front three of Kane and Son and Kulusevski or Richarlison. That was a lot more of how Chelsea was. They had Willian um, as that connection between the defense and the strikers, and they could have a quick break, and they were dangerous that way. And Tuchel, very different philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Slowing the game down. He had a they've talked over and over. He established a great defensive mindset at Chelsea, and they did. They had a very strong defense, but they lost that dangerous attacking threat. Um, and
Yeah, and
Isaac is not a
right.
possession player.
No, he was those
he's not a Man
counterattack,
City.
press.
He's
Yeah,
not a
go
Man
hard.
City
Yep.
player. He's a counterattacking, attacking threat.
Yeah, and when
So
Tuchel slowed their game down, it changed a lot of the dynamics, right? Like, I can't have guys on the
absolutely.
field that get the ball and go full tilt, right? And I mean, and what was interesting, and I don't know how many people have seen this, but like Christian Pulisic recently put a book out.
I knew he did. I haven't read it
Yeah, I
yet,
mean, I haven't
but
read it either. I probably will never read it because what do I care, right? Like, I don't. What am I going to learn about you? It's not going to change my life. But what I thought was interesting, and honestly, I don't know if he meant it the way that it's come off, but in hindsight of how it's come off, I think was in pretty poor taste, is the way that he talked about his disagreements with Tuchel, and his disappointments with not getting to play in the Champions League. And the reason that I'm saying that is because Kylian Mbappe disagrees with what's happening at PSG, and he doesn't like Neymar, and he wants out. And the owner of PSG and the coach of PSG said, yeah, we feel for this guy, and we're trying to work with him, and we're reassuring him we're going to figure it out. Christian Pulisic is not a Kylian Mbappe, right? Chelsea fans are going to be like, get lost. Like, who are you, pretty boy, that you think that you're so good that you can make these comments, right? Like, you didn't change Chelsea's,
absolutely.
life and stuff like that. So, like, I don't think that's what Pulisic meant. I just think it's unfortunate, tying into the culture part, that I think it hurt him. To
Yes,
then sort of have to, like, you're still there,
feeling entitled
right?
to,
Exactly, and that American entitled, right? Because it ties into that American sport culture of like, I paid a bunch of money and I'm really good and young and the media loves me, so give me what I want.
well, and unfortunately, because he was so much of like the only star, if you ever watch anything soccer related on ESPN or CBS, which a lot of I know overseas they have Sky Sports, and Sky Sports covers a lot of these other things, but I'm sure there are people in Europe who are watching ESPN, and who are watching like on Paramount Plus they have all the Champions League games. I'm sure there are some people watching that, and when there's so much focus on if Pulisic played or not, and if he did enough to earn more time, and there's so much focus on that. I'm sure that's frustrating for them,
Right.
for somebody
It's
who's
like
not a
me.
U.S.
I
fan.
mute, man. Every time Alexi Lawless is a commentator and the analyst thing. I mute the halftime, right? I get it.
Mhm.
Like, and if
Yeah.
and if I'm and this is something that, like, if you haven't watched the Super Greed thing that had chatting about, I think it's also on Amazon Prime. It's about the recent attempt to have a Super League with like those Elite Eight teams and lock in all the money. That's one of the things that they start to bring up is how many teams are owned by American companies and by Americans, and how that just doesn't go well because
Well,
of the
and
culture. The culture doesn't
yeah,
mesh.
absolutely. And that's one of the giant things, especially if you're talking about English soccer fans. They, they hate American interest in soccer mainly because of the Glazers at Man United.
Oh,
You
dude.
know,
Oh my gosh, and they cover the
Glazers,
Glazers and this thing. Dude, like the
yeah,
effigies that people were burning and surrounding the stadium and
yeah.
like
And I
protesting
mean, I'm
games and like harassing players.
I've been a Manchester United since the early, I've been a fan of Manchester United since the early 2000s with Higgs and Scholes and Roy Keane, and those teams.
Yeah, they were like
Eric
the media
Cantona.
team, right? I think like every kid
I
at least
loved them.
enjoyed Manchester United,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. And I still I'm less of a fan of them now. 'Cause I'm more of a fan of. I try to just US players mostly, and so I'm
Hmm.
watching those games. But I do still cheer for Man United, and I feel for those fans because the Glazers they really do not see it as a do not see the soccer as the focal point of owning the club.
Right,
See the money. That's what they see as the focal point of the club.
right,
So I think that type of attitude that you see, the money, as you said, the money that gets involved in soccer from America colors the view of American soccer interests, um, because it's like, yeah, the perception is, well, you guys don't actually care about soccer. You don't have the passion and love
right.
for soccer that all of
Hmm.
all the rest of us do. And it's like, you know what? You're right. The owners don't.
They
The
don't
the people who play it still do.
still do, right? Well, and
But
what's
they can't separate those two.
right, and I know that this is like this is obviously a comedy I'm about to bring up, but um, there really isn't much better of an example than Ted Lasso. Right, and it, as silly as the show is, and it's enjoyable, it's funny. Like I just get a kick out
A
of
good show.
every clip
Yeah.
that I watch. When you look at, right, tying this into what we're talking about, we're gonna make it win or lose, right, or draw. Okay, win, lose, or draw. Wait, there's ties. You guys can tie in the sport. Like when the season's over, okay, and Manchester City's going to win. Okay, like I just don't see any other. I just really don't see. Arsenal's a fantastic team. I love watching Arsenal this season, and I'm not really, being a Spurs fan, I'm not a fan of the Gunners. I am enjoying watching them this year, but the difference between the EPL and American sports is at the end of the season, if Manchester City goes like, I don't know how many weeks of it are, I don't keep track of that, but like 24-2, nobody cares about their two losses. Right, like
Yeah, exactly.
nobody cares, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they win. There's no playoffs. There's no nothing. Like they win. But in the United States, right? And I'll just talk about like the NHL. The Florida Panthers last year won the President's Trophy. Do you know how many times the team who's won the President's Trophy has won the Stanley Cup? It's like a whopping 0 times. And it's this draw that we have in American sports that like the
The
best teams,
playoffs are a huge
right?
deal.
And
Yeah.
and I'm sorry for whoever this is going to offend. The best team isn't the team that wins the playoffs.
I mean, I'm fully on board with that. I'm a Giants fan, a New York Giants fan, and we can go back to the 2007 season. The Patriots were undefeated.
Right.
I love, talking about the 18-1 Patriots. But the reality is, yeah, they were absolutely the best team that year. They were amazing.
Right.
They were not the best team for the last like 3 games of the season, and that's
Right.
it.
And in America,
Um,
right, like we have that, like we want that fantasy world. We want to like have that spectacle of I only want to be able to focus on the one loss the Patriots had, right? And I know you don't do this, right? Right? Like, but you think about like how many Giants fans walked around going like, "Yeah, we're better than them." And it's like, "No, wake up. You're not. They were 18-1.
We,
What were you that season, right? Like,
yeah.
and it's sort of
We
like this
were
thing.
10-6.
I was gonna say, right? Like, and you didn't have a bad record, right? The Giants didn't have a bad record that year, but when you go forward and you try to put this in like the greater scheme of everything, when the Jets went 1-14, oh well, we'll see you next year, right? If Manchester
Yeah.
City went 1-14, bye bye, right? And that's
Well, yeah, and relegation is a huge deal.
right. Relegation
You
is
lose so much
massive.
money getting relegated.
We're just gonna keep giving shameless plugs to shows. Go watch Sunderland Till I Die. If you want to know what getting relegated is like, and the entire you will never have a better, I can't even do it justice, a better piece of the whole picture of what soccer is to a city than watching Sunderland go from the Premier League into the Championship into the First Division, and just watch all of the money from the entire city just vanish. Right? Watch people's hopes and dreams just like all fall apart because
I mean, that's
you can
true,
still.
you know.
I could go buy Browns tickets. I could buy Browns tickets next year. I could buy Brown tickets the year after that. I don't want to buy Browns tickets, just because I don't want to. But like I could, right? But if Tottenham gets relegated, maybe I'm all of a sudden not a Tottenham fan, right? And because I want to watch Premier League, and it's not the same. And in America, like we want to fantasize that, right? Like we want those Cinderella stories. That's why we love March Madness. And we don't really want to know who the best team is, because if we had to do that, then we have to recognize that it's not our team, and it's boring, right? Like, oh well, it's over. Like the pandemic year when like Liverpool was undefeated, and like we're not. It's not even December yet, and Liverpool's like. It's Liverpool and like 3 teams even have a shot at winning, and everybody else is eliminated because Liverpool's won that many games. And from like that culture aspect of it, tying it into the U.S. men, something that other sports fans then don't get to experience is what you and I had to go through 5 years ago. Right? Standing there and listening to that whistle get blown in a 2-2 draw, and just staring at the television going, that's it.
Like, how are we not going to be there?
Right. So the biggest tournament in the world's going to happen. Then a whole year of rebuilding. Then half a year of qualifying. I mean, we were looking at almost 3 years of soccer gone. All because we had a bunch of boneheads want to walk around in the field. But no other sport, I mean, look, what's the worst thing that happens? Right? Like, all right, so the worst thing that happens is maybe you're the Arizona Coyotes and you're 10 games into the season, you're 0-10, and you're like, well, I guess there's next year, right? And your franchise gets sold or whatever. And that's not great. That's still really bad. But it's different than all of a sudden,
Team
like
doesn't exist anymore.
Right. When like Norwich City gets relegated and now they're like trying to fight for their spot back, or Fulham goes and drops down. Like, and while that's scary, I think it breeds a much better culture and climate because there's always something to play for. Right.
Yes, yeah.
Absolutely. And I agree.
I mean, the last couple of weeks of the Premier League season are always exciting.
Right.
It doesn't matter if Man City has run away with it and they're 10 points clear, because you have those relegation spots. They're fighting not to get relegated. And you also have the Champions League spots. Like, people are fighting to get into that top 4.
Yep.
People are fighting to get into the top 6 to make the Europa League.
Or you ever watch like the championship, the promotion games in the championship?
Oh,
Those games are wild. Those are some wild games. And like, we don't have that, right? We got like the end of the season, like the Jets are going to play the Falcons, and you're like, and no one cares. And everybody who's got them on their fantasy teams is like, oh gosh, like, because nobody cares. And that doesn't happen, right? That doesn't happen overseas.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It does. It creates a different atmosphere.
So now focusing on teams in general, right? And can Leeds United, can Leeds United change the world's perspective on U.S. soccer? And if they can, Where do they need to finish in the Premier League to do that?
Um,
And if you don't know why I'm asking this question,
I do. I do.
Tyler, well, no, I know you
Um,
do, but if people at home don't know
yeah.
why I'm doing this, Jesse Marsh is their coach. He's an American. Brendan Aronson is American playing on their team, and Tyler Adams is an American playing on their team. And apparently, all you need is 3 Americans to figure this out. And what's really ironic about that is apparently there's some league in Italy where Gianluca Buzio and a whole bunch of other Americans play, and they're like the worst team in that league. And so we just kind of don't talk about them because if we want people to like American soccer. But anyway, so can Leeds do it? And if they can, where do they need to finish to make it happen?
I mean, no, they can't create that wholesale change. But I think they can definitely start the shift. Obviously, the shift has started a little bit with some of the individual players, with Pulisic and Reina, especially those two, having the recognition that they've had, and kind of the praise that they've had. As we've said, the conversation is still, Americans are second-class soccer players and they don't really understand the game. And so, yes, absolutely, Leeds can start to shift that conversation. You're arguing that you have a foil to say, well, look, these guys are doing pretty well, and I would say, probably. I mean, I would say top half. If they can finish in the top half, if they can finish 10 or higher, that's good enough for me, at least, to be able to point to the system and the players and say, hey, look, they are good enough to be in the top 10 teams in England. And
They're currently 2 points behind Fulham at ninth.
Yeah.
So
So I mean, that's a decent start. Realistically, not this year. If they can start to reach up into like the Europa League spots, or at least the Conference League spots, if they can start to get into those in the next few years, then absolutely that'll be a conversation change. Because, and it's not only Jesse Marsh and Tyler Adams and Brandon Aronson. Jack Harrison is one of their main players there, and he's English. He's English born. He moved to America for schooling, in his later teen years, and he went to an American college and played in the American college system, and went, and then went into. I don't remember if he went into MLS or not, but then went back to England, and he's playing on that team as well. So he's somewhat American trained player.
Mm-hmm.
You have that whole conglomerate of the American culture in that team. Then they're definitely having an influence on the team as a whole. And Leeds they're a whole lot of fun to watch. They're a little bit of a they're definitely a nail biter team, because when they're 100% on their game,
nail biters.
When they're on their game, and the press is all connected to each other and they're stepping up in unison, and they're really good. They're dangerous. They can win and strike like lightning. They give teams fits defensively. As soon as that timing and that cohesion, if somebody starts to get tired and that starts to fall apart, they can get ripped to shreds so quickly. So.
Right. Yeah, and they're just one of those scrappy, like, gung ho, go for it, fight them out teams. Something, another thing that is fairly large in this whole scale that is very different from like American sports, right? Is we start to tie the media into this, right? And before I get into like the U.S. Soccer Federation's effect on all of this, the NBA, NHL, MLB, all of the players they have to deal with are right there, right? They're here in the United States. But for U.S. soccer, right, if the American media wanted to cover U.S. soccer, it's going to be expensive to do that.
Yeah.
Right, it's going to be pretty expensive, and not solely just because they're not in the United States. They're just not in one spot. So they're
Yeah.
in the MLS, they're in England, they're in Italy, they're in Austria, they're in France, they're in, um, Spain, they're all over the place. And
Mhm.
so trying to cover them gets really difficult, especially
Yeah.
when there's so many different leagues. And there's a couple tactical manager. I've mentioned him a couple other times. He does probably the best job of just like he's got a running tab on all of the players, and he
Mhm.
mostly just does first string guys.
Mhm.
So like guys that are playing for like the top division or top teams. Like I think P Folk is probably the deepest that he goes with some of his
Mhm.
stuff. He'll touch on other guys if they're in the mix of doing it, but like it still goes to show that like we're going to YouTube content creators to do their own independent research to figure out
Yeah.
like who this is,
Mhm.
and who any of these other players are. And so bringing this back to the U.S. Soccer Federation, right?
Mhm.
One of the things that I've seen culture wise for U.S. soccer is this repetition on this. And you can go ahead and when I say this, you can correct me if you think I'm wrong. There's been this cycle that happens over and over with the U.S. Soccer Federation. We bring in a brand new coach, and when we bring in a brand new coach, the player pool explodes. And all of a
Mhm.
sudden, we've discovered all these players nobody knew about from all over the world. And they come in and they play in camp and they look really exciting. And we play a couple games and we win some things and we get the fans really hyped up. And once we got everybody bought in, all of a sudden, a lot of those fun guys go away and we keep some of them, but we get more of like our tried and true guys that the American media really wants to push. And then we wind up playing like garbage, right? And I noticed this because people were like, oh, Greg, and they're ripping on Greg Berhalter, and they're ripping on Greg Berhalter. And before that, they ripped on Jurgen Klinsmann. And before that, I was one of them, we were ripping on, Bob Bradley. But all of those coaches and the coaches before them did the same thing. And it's not just because when you're a new coach, you just want to see new faces, right? Obviously, the player pool is going
Mhm.
to expand. But like with Jurgen Klinsmann, I was so excited because all of a sudden we just had all these players from all over the place. And then what happens super quickly, all of a sudden the American media gets in and we got like all of a sudden, oh, there's Jermaine Jones. He's like this guy from Germany who's going to come in. And I was like, wow, the guy couldn't cut it over there, so we're going to take him, right? Like, and it's the same thing that's happening
Exactly
here,
that.
right? Like we had all of these amazing players, right? Basilic is hurt, McKinney's hurt. We win the Gold Cup, we win the Nations Cup. We're just playing a bunch of dudes, right? Gio
Mhm.
Reyna is shining. Gianluca Buzio is shining. Um, like Pepe played okay, right? Like we had all of this young talent. So when both of the Robinsons stepped on the thing, we got to see who they were. I don't even think Des got an opportunity. I think he got a couple games out there, but like even still early on, like the midfield, like that's when Yunus Musa steps onto the scene. Tyler Adams is stepping onto the scene. We see Brendan Aronson. We see Josh Sargent. We see all these guys, and after having not seen soccer for like 3 years, this is like the biggest breath of fresh air that we have.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we've sort of rode that into letting the Christian Rodons come back and letting and now here we are, getting ready to go. And I don't know. And I think that's the one thing that the Soccer Federation and the media have had that's a detrimental effect on our soccer culture is it seems to be more than other countries do. I know other countries, their fans still have the fan favorites and they still get like super picky, but U.S. Soccer, the Federation, loves the MLS. And they just
Yes.
like, as
Yes,
soon
it
as
does.
the brand new players come in and they get everybody hyped and everybody's like, oh, this is the year for the boys. We're going to do it. And then the U.S. Soccer's like, oh, everybody's paying attention to us. Hey, guys, everybody's paying attention. And they just grab like the most exciting MLS guy. And they're like, we got this guy. And everybody who knows soccer's like, yeah, I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want Kellen Acosta to get more playing time. I don't want Paul Areola on my roster. I don't want to see Jesus Ferreira as my striker. But they got you.
No,
They
I
didn't.
mean,
They didn't get me anywhere. They didn't
like
do anything for me.
I don't necessarily know. I'm not going to blame it on anybody in particular, but yes, there is a pattern of, um, yeah, the names that like people have known and seen for a few years coming back. Giassi Zardes. Why was he on any of our teams last summer?
Right.
Even though he did score goals, like, yeah,
Yeah, the goals he scored,
because
like,
because he can, but he's not a consistent performer. He's not a top quality talent. Um, yeah, maybe we're not sure about some of the younger guys of whether they are that yet. Man, they show a lot more potential than a lot of these other guys.
right. And it
You
ties
know,
into like
Kellen.
like Stuart Holden and Edson Buttle, right? It's like we're getting all hyped for that World Cup year. Stuart Holden's leading the English Premier League in tackles, and he plays 0 minutes in the World Cup. None. Right? And what happens? What happens in that World Cup? I'm screaming at my television because we got Christian Roldan, or not Christian Roldan, Ricardo Clark just giving the ball away in the midfield to Ghana. And there's a guy on the bench who doesn't do that.
Yes, and they'll talk about he was injured and they was he back to full fitness, and it's like even if he even if he wasn't quite full fitness, you gotta give him a shot. He has proven himself to be a fantastic player.
Right, 35 minutes at least, right? Throw him on the
Yeah, give
pitch.
him a chance. Give him a chance to get out there and show whether or not he's ready to play, whether or not he's fit. Yeah, obviously we don't see the practices, but I watched a whole lot of Stuart Holden in that time period, and 80% Stuart Holden is better. That time was better than you know every player on our roster except maybe Clint Dempsey and Landon Donovan.
Right. Right.
80% Stuart Holden is better than all of the rest of them.
Right.
Why are you not trying to play him?
Right. Well, because I want to play the coach's kid. I gotta play this guy.
Yeah.
But tying it into culture, it is something that like money really becomes this huge factor, right? You talk about the problem that Man U fans have with the Glaziers, right? This is the one thing the fans have, right? The U.S. men's team, this right here, this is the one thing you and I have, that we could put this jersey on, and it's everything else is going to go away, right? It's us against the world on this massive stage, and it's truly like the players, it's for the fans. This is a sport that everybody can afford, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's this whole world, like the whole world plays this game. It's so totally different. And that's the one thing that American culture doesn't have. American culture wants the glamour, they want the money, they want the win, and they want to have something to show for it, right? We have playoffs so you can win Super Bowl rings and trophies and lift cups and do all this other stuff. And some of the best teams in the world are not going to lift a trophy in this World Cup, right? As a matter of fact, 35 of them, right? Or 31 of them.
Yes.
31 of them are not going to lift a cup. They're just not going to do it. And that doesn't mean they're not good teams, right? Belgium probably doesn't lift the World Cup this year. Belgium's phenomenal, right?
Yeah.
Brazil might not even lift the
players.
World Cup this year. England might not lift the World Cup this year. And it doesn't matter because it was never about any of that, right? Like, yes, it's about that trophy, right? Yes, everybody's going for that trophy. I'm going to reword what I said. It's because that's the goal and that's what you're living for. No amount of money in the world, it could alter any of those things. And so it creates these moments where South Africa ties, right? In their opening matches, right? Like, what if Qatar shocks the world, right? It creates these amazing moments. And, I think that's something that hurts us. I think that's something that it's hard to explain to non-soccer fans, that it might be a boring game. It might not have the glamour. It might not have the money. It might not have whatever, but like it has all this other stuff, and it has heart, and it has passion, and it's why we call it the beautiful game, and
yeah, I mean, I used to love watching Barcelona, in the 11, 12 seasons, like had so many games that were like, I mean, yeah, they had lots of games where they scored lots of goals because they had Messi, but they also had lots of games where they won like 1-0. When they played the other top teams, when they played in the Champions League, they won 1-0, 2-1. And I loved watching those games, even though there wasn't a lot of goals scored, because of just the way they played. The way they manipulated the field, they moved the ball around. You know, playing against Barcelona in those times, it was like a grindstone. Like they just wore you down with how
Hmm.
perfect they were.
Right.
And yeah, that's not exciting to somebody who's looking for basketball where they're going back and forth and scoring 120 points a game. That maybe it's not exciting, but you get into the
Right.
game, it's amazing to watch.
Right. And it has this aspect that I don't think any other sport has, in that amazing glory that comes from scoring that goal, right? The excitement that
Yeah,
comes from scoring goals. And I,
yeah.
I watch, like the NHL used to have very few goals get scored, and it was super exciting. And the NHL now, I mean, on average, about 6 goals a game, which is actually a pretty high number, right? But you look at a lot of soccer games, right? If you're playing a tournament where one single game is going to be the difference, and it's going to be the difference every single time, and most games are only won by one goal,
Yeah.
that sensation, right?
Yeah, when that goal
When
is
that
scored,
when
it's
that goal
just
goes in,
it's unmatched.
it's
Absolutely.
right.
I
You
mean,
you just can't
we had
match it.
the Donovan goal in is that the 14?
Yeah. Yep. In the
And
in the
the
14
14
one.
World Cup.
Yep.
That his goal in the last, it was amazing. Like that feeling is just unmatched.
And when
Absolutely.
and when people talk about that, U.S. soccer fans remember where they were when that goal got scored, right? I remember
And the
standing in my bedroom with you next to me, running out onto the front porch with my neighbor from across the street punting his soccer ball across the road, and us climbing on the roof and then getting in a car and singing and driving downtown, right? And some of the
absolutely.
people got it. Some of the people downtown knew they knew why we were doing it, but most of the people were like, "Who are these crazy people?" Right? They didn't
Yes.
even know.
The only other time in any sports that I have felt that, and I've felt that several times in watching soccer. The only other time I felt that was in that Giants season in the Super Bowl playing the Patriots, um, when they scored their last, well, the helmet catch before that, and then the last
It was
touchdown,
pretty
that
sweet. The helmet
drive,
catch was pretty
like
sweet.
that. That's the only other time any other sports has come close to that emotional level of just the, like you said, the reward of, like, I've put in all this time to watch, I've put in all my emotions to support, and like one thing happened and it all pays off in this one moment.
Hmm.
um, yeah, no, absolutely, that in soccer that happens far more than in any other sport.
It does. It sure does. Well, I guess we're gonna have to chat again to come up with a 26-man roster and talk about a lot of Greg's tactics. But I really I
Absolutely.
really enjoyed this conversation. I hope that everybody who's listening has it. If you didn't know any of those things or you hadn't thought about soccer culture that way, I hope you at least give it a thought. And to tag on something Stuart Holden has said, I hope that we presented this information in a manner that wasn't soccer fans acting like snobs jumping down your throat, because Stuart Holden did say that we soccer fans have a problem when it comes to letting other people into our circle because they're truly clueless and we're very snobbish and we really don't like it. But
You
we
better get
need
it right.
right, but we need to like it because it's the
Yes.
only way the culture is going to change, and we have to start letting people into our culture. So, Chris, you got any final thoughts before we wrap this thing up?
um, just on the culture itself, I mean, the biggest issue is the money thing. That so much of growing players' success is centered around money, and what they can afford to participate in. I don't have an answer for it. Obviously, um, I don't have an answer to how to change it. But if we're going to change the culture of the players and the opportunities for the players, that's definitely where it has to start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And I know that, the media is always going to be a big contender. And The more that I've looked into it, the more research I've done, the older I've gotten. I've always thought I had it right. I've always thought I had it figured out. My dad and I earlier this year were just talking about maybe the problem is that our best athletes go play other sports. And we did some research and we looked into the demographics and the physical attributes and all sorts of stuff. And we realized not really. Like,
Well, and
it's just different athletes going
yes,
into
exactly.
different sports.
People,
And it's not
people try
really,
to say that. People try to say that, and the reality is like LeBron James is an incredible athlete and a phenomenal athletic specimen. He doesn't have the physique to play soccer.
right.
He wouldn't last.
Right.
Look
And it
at
doesn't mean he might not be
Chad
really good
Johnson.
at it, right? Like he might be really good
Yeah.
at it, but he's not going to be, elite level.
Chad Johnson, Chad Ochocinco, I think he was at the time. Um, he was a Cincinnati receiver. He was one of the best in the league. He was very fast, and he during the lockout strike season, I don't remember what year that was. He went and tried. Was it Kansas City? Maybe tried to play with like their development soccer team, and I watched one game, and he was a winger because he was fast, so they put him on the wing to chase balls and cross him into the box, and they put him on the field, and he lasted like 10 minutes. He didn't have the
Right.
football physique was not the soccer physique.
Right.
So
Yeah. So to wrap this up, I'm going to share a small story that I have from a parent at one of our centers. And so we have there's a dad at our center, and he's from Ghana, and his dad played for Ghana's national soccer team, and played for them for a while. And when he met me, and I noticed he had an Inter Milan jersey on, and I started sharing that stuff, he was so surprised to meet an American soccer fan. And not just an American who played soccer or who knew what soccer was, but who actually understood soccer. European teams could have the whole conversation. And he looked at me one day when we were having this chat, and he said, in my country, in Ghana, if I go back home, everybody plays soccer. And he goes, if you don't play soccer, and he paused and he thought for the word, and he said, feminine? Does that make sense? And I was like, yes. Like you're like less manly, like you're looked at as like a wuss, right? Like I know that might not be a fun term to hear, but like you're looked down upon, right? You're gonna get made fun of because you don't fit in, right? Like anybody who's gonna do a real sport. And I laughed and I looked at him and I said, in America, it's the opposit.
if you play soccer,
soccer, you're the kid who couldn't make it in a real sport, right? Like,
Yep.
when you and I were in high school, kids said it to us, right? Like the girls' team is what is for soccer. Like if you guys are going to play soccer, go play for the girls' team. Like we're trying to use this team, for football, despite the fact that our football team was terrible, and really hasn't gotten any better ever. But like that was the thing, and I just think that's probably the clearest picture that you could see with like the world comparison of soccer and the American view of soccer is like,
absolutely.
over here, this is what you do if you want to be somebody. If you want to like make your family look good and you want to represent your town and make it, you better play soccer. And in America, it's like, you should probably try anything else, right? You should hit somebody with a helmet until your brain falls out of your head, and that's it. But I don't know. Chris, I'm so glad we got to have this conversation. I look forward to having another one with you. Hopefully get a chance to meet up next week. Hopefully we get a chance to talk about what we think the roster should be before the roster gets released, but who knows? I know that's going to come up really soon. I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I know it's been a long episode, but I hope it's been good. If you haven't hit that like button, you should hit the like button on this video. You should drop some comments. You should subscribe if you think this is stuff that you want to get into. Check out some of those other things we mentioned. Check out some of the other YouTubers. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you guys next time on Extra Time.